My name is Richard Reeser, and I'm General Secretary of the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum, and I'd like to welcome you to this seminar on the barriers to disabled people being involved in the parliamentary and election process, held jointly by the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and Sightsavers, who've been doing work on this in several African countries, and we've got 3 representatives from them who are going to talk to us about that. A little bit about the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum. We started in Uganda in 2007, formally set up in 2008. Did some good work until about 2013 when we ran into financial and organisational difficulties, went to sleep for 5 years. At the Global Summit in London in 2018, a number of colleagues who'd been involved in it from around the Commonwealth came up to me as I was the treasurer and London Link and said, "Come on, Richard, we need to get this going again." So we did. And we held a meeting the next June in New York where 27 national umbrellas organizations were there. And we're building up now to a virtual General Assembly in April, which has already started with some of the balloting and so on. And on that, we have 38 countries represented. So we're growing. And our membership is actually at 47 out of the 54 countries. So we think we're moving on this. I'm very pleased to moderate this meeting in the cut and thrust of disability politics at an international level. This is an area that gets left out. And I think it's really important that both Sightsavers and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association are putting a focus on it. The asks, the main areas of ask in 2018 Global Summit and the 2022 do not cover this area. So it's very important that we look at this because it's in many ways a cornerstone across the Commonwealth, which prides itself on having democratic structures, unlike many other regional groups around the world, and the rule of law, that the voice of disabled people themselves, persons with disabilities, is present both in the election but also in Parliament. So we're very pleased that our first speaker today is a parliamentarian from Kenya, the Honourable Denita Gatti, who's a member of the Parliament there, and is also the chairperson of the Commonwealth Parliamentary network of persons with disabilities, which was set up 3 years ago, and I think is really important. So over to you, Denita. I'm very pleased to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, for ably moderating. And I bring you greetings from Nairobi, Kenya, where I am based. I'm a member of Parliament in the National Assembly of Kenya. And I'm also the chairperson of the Commonwealth Parliamentarians with Disabilities Network. It is a network of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association that is basically looking at issues to do with members of Parliament with disabilities and enhancing their spaces so that members of Parliament with disabilities across the Commonwealth countries and beyond are able to operate well in their various execution of their roles, and also to make sure that even the parliamentary staff also respond to issues of parliamentarians with disabilities across the Commonwealth. So basically the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association operates, that is very active in over 180 parliaments and legislatures. So the CPA basically is huge, and you can see I have been working around issues of members of Parliament with disabilities as the chairperson, having become the chair last year, And so across the Commonwealth, or across Africa, or across Asia, across Europe, you will realize that hardly do persons with disabilities really become members of Parliament. It is very, very difficult to find a person with disability being elected into Parliament, and this cuts across the several parliaments. When you go into Parliament, you realize that MPs who are already existing in Parliament a majority of them are not members of Parliament with disabilities. And this begs the question, how do persons with disabilities really engage themselves in terms of politics, in terms of getting themselves into parliament. Richard, you may be aware that majority of our countries in the Commonwealth and beyond around the globe have actually signed and even ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. If you look at Article 29 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it guarantees that state parties to the UN CRPD make it conducive, for persons with disabilities to participate in the political process. But again, as you walk around, you realize that majority of our countries actually do not, they're good on these social issues. Countries are very good on social matters as pertains to persons with disabilities, but when it comes to politics, I think most of our countries have really not done much in terms of ensuring that the political participation of persons with disabilities into getting themselves into parliament or into political spaces is enhanced. So that is why you realize that the numbers of members of parliament with disabilities who get elected, who do politics, is extremely wanting across the globe, not only in Africa, because in my execution of my role as chairperson, I have actually come across countries of the Commonwealth or countries across the globe that do not have even a member of parliament sitting in their parliaments with a disability. So you see, it becomes extremely difficult to be able to execute that angle of politics for persons with disabilities. So in the Commonwealth, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Associations has prioritized disability matters as part of its work, so that we are able to, put together persons with disabilities. We are able to develop programs that actually can sustain persons with disabilities to get into politics. Now, ideally, Richard, you will also notice that society continues to discriminate against persons with disabilities when it comes to politics. These stereotypes, these cultures that continue to not see persons with disabilities as capable of getting into politics, as capable of being seen, as capable of becoming, being voted for, it becomes a problem across the globe. So that is why you realize that in parliaments, you don't get members of parliament with disabilities who have been voted. Although there have been specific milestones, little milestones here and there, to ensure that persons with disabilities get into parliament, what most countries are doing and what most legislators are doing is to come up with mechanisms, to come up with laws, including affirmative action, that get persons with disabilities into parliament. Now, this affirmative action majorly means that persons with disabilities are chosen, or they are nominated by their political parties to join politics. But when it comes to real elections, where persons with disabilities have to be voted for, you will notice that they're hardly voted for. So we still have to look at our laws and to look at what it is that countries have. What does the Constitution, if possible, actually, in the CPA, we have been trying to see how do we even look at our constitutions of parliament of our countries. Constitutions must guarantee persons with disabilities to get into elective politics, not nominative politics. So that is the issue that persons with disabilities continue to face, both in Africa and Europe and every other place. You will also notice that poverty levels amongst persons with disabilities do not guarantee them opportunities to campaign. I mean, politics is difficult. Politics is extremely difficult, and persons with disabilities are extremely impoverished. They are poor, they are lower in the cadre, economic ladders, they're quite lower. So you realize that persons with disabilities across the globe would rather think of, do we have to put food on the table or do we have to do politics? So that you notice that they don't do politics. They end up, choosing the easy option, which is actually looking at food and to put food on the table, than spending the little money they have to getting into politics. Now, you will also notice, and what we have seen as we move forward, is that even as much as our countries have actually signed the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, you see that inaccessible infrastructure, persons with disabilities who basically have to use a wheelchair, for example, like myself, because I'm a disabled member of parliament, I have a physical disability. Many persons with disabilities who would wish to do politics. When you look at the infrastructure to do politics, the podia, how podia are constructed, where you have to go. When you look at the campaign materials, they are not disability friendly. They are not accessible to persons with disabilities, for example, who have visually impaired, for example. They cannot, the infrastructure has continued to be extremely inaccessible to persons with disabilities to do politics. And therefore, all these things coupled with poverty, coupled with, discrimination from family, coupled with inaccessible infrastructure, coupled with a way in which people do not see persons with disabilities as people who can actually be seen and be heard, it becomes very, very difficult for persons with disabilities to actually get themselves into a podium, for example, and do politics. Because let me tell you, colleagues, for persons with disabilities, for you to be able to be seen, because I do politics myself, I am nominated by my political party in Kenya, which is the Orange Democratic Movement, to represent persons with disabilities. You see, I am nominated. But even in the Parliament of Kenya, where I sit, we have extremely few members of parliament who have been elected to sit there. So when you get into parliament, you will notice that even within the setup of parliaments are extremely not conducive for persons with disabilities. There are no ramps, there are no, these accessible materials, for example, and those are the challenges that continue to exist. Because I think sometimes what we need to do is basically, we as members of Parliament with Disabilities, or as DPOs, as disabled persons organization, is to continue creating awareness. We have a duty to really continue to create awareness so that persons with disabilities are seen as viable and as meaningful persons with disabilities to be able to be elected, so that we are not only focusing on nominative or slots that we're calling the special seats. We also have so many of our countries that are yet to ratify the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which guarantees the participation of persons with disabilities, for example, also in the political process. So countries are yet to ratify the UN Convention. We as the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, CPA, have also tried a lot to develop, materials that continue to shape the work that we do in Parliament, and part of that work is basically materials like this one that I'm really showing, that we have developed a strategic plan of the CPA that continues to actually help us in terms of doing our work. So there's a lot that needs to be done. We also have to look at the legislations that exist to be able to ensure that they provide for this affirmative action for persons with disabilities. So political parties, play a very key role, and we also must ensure, and we lobby political parties, working with all these partners in politics, are partners that continue to ensure that persons with disabilities are actually supported. Because across the globe, persons, for you to get into parliament or politics, for example, you must belong to a political party. A political party gives you a head start to get into politics. And so we must continue to lobby our electoral bodies, to lobby our political parties, to be able to see persons with disabilities as viable and as meaningful, because we have seen that political parties are also sometimes a hindrance to the participation of persons with disabilities in politics. So these are the issues that continue, compounding to the difficulties and challenges that persons with disabilities face in the political process. And we must continue to really look at them, really look at push as members of parliament also, and as persons with disabilities must get themselves out into politics. Kenya is getting into a political phase in 2022, this year, in August. we are getting into a general election, for example. A general election where we're going to elect a new president and, members of parliament are going to be new. Everybody's going to be new in parliament. You can imagine if persons with disabilities are not participating in politics. We are seeing quite a number of persons with disabilities coming out to vote, coming out to offer themselves as candidates. So we need to ensure that we lobby our political parties and our electoral bodies to ensure that persons with disabilities are included even in the party list that they are gonna take part. I will be in the process of seeking an election. So we do hope that this work that we continue to do and work that we have done across the Commonwealth parliaments is gonna help persons with disabilities get themselves into politics, because it is their right to do politics.
Thank you so much. That's really kicked us off to a good start. We heard from you that there is a specific article, which is Article 29 of the UN Convention, that covers this process. We heard that there's still some countries to ratify. I think we're down to 1 or 2 out of the 54 in the Commonwealth now. The big problem is implementation. And actually, even before they implemented, when they just signed up to it, they should have done nothing to get in the way of implementing the convention. So countries have all had a long time, since 2008, to put their house in order, and they haven't. They haven't set up a commission. This actually requires an electoral commission to ensure that the electoral process is accessible. Most countries have not done that. And most of our coalition members of the Commonwealth, our DPOs, don't have this as their main focus of putting a list together of people who want to run for parliament and then approaching parties. In some countries, I think I'm right in saying Uganda, you don't have to be in a party. They run a list and they have something like 23,000 representatives at all of their different levels who are disabled people, but they're out on their own compared to all the other Commonwealth countries. So this is a big issue, and obviously, as you so ably showed us, Denita, you need to have disabled people with their voice there talking about our issues, because that is really the thing. Nothing about us, or as they were saying yesterday, without us, nothing. Maybe. Okay, so I'm now going to go to Joseph Oye and his colleague Sandra Rimmer, who are going to talk to us about their experience working for Sightsavers in Cameroon around the electoral process. So over to you, Joseph.
Thank you very much, Richard, and greetings to the panelists and greetings to all the attendees to this webinar. So I'm here with my colleague Sandra Remo. So we're going to present together. I'm going to now share my screen to start our presentation. We talk briefly about the overview of the project, key achievements, and then learnings. So this is really a journey, and which we started in 2010. And the reason we started this project, just like what Denita was talking about, is about all the barriers that people with disabilities face to be part of the political arena. We have political barriers whereby disabilities were not or are not still some progress making national participation is very weak. Electoral code and other relevant legal frameworks are not disability friendly. The need for persons with disabilities are invisible to political policymakers. And we also got some financial barriers, because in just like Erika was describing, in Cameroon, for you to be part of a list in a political party, you need to contribute some money. Also, there are barriers at family and individual level. You have the stigma that our predecessor talked about. The environment, again, also that is very inaccessible. You have also inaccessible communication. And the tendency is that the charity model that will prevail, where people with disabilities are seen as people who need help. So all what people do or used to do is to provide food, right, bags of rice and things like that all the time to persons with disabilities. And I think we must also, when we talk about the barriers, we must also include here the personal barriers to the persons with disabilities themselves. That is, a lot of people with disabilities lack the confidence, and they actually desperate. They think this is not their thing. They don't have anything to do with political participation. I think that's also an important barrier. I said we started in 2010 ahead of the presidential elections that was going to take place the next year, where we had a project called Accessible Elections for Persons with Disabilities. That was very successful because we set up 15 inclusive pilot polling stations to demonstrate accessibility, in physical accessibility of ballot voting station, different things. We have 15 like that across the country. That was very, very successful, really, and that was an important milestone towards that journey. And in 2010, the group that participated in that, the people with disabilities that were with us, decided to actually create a permanent platform, a permanent umbrella body, which is still functioning now. So now it is moved from Accessible Elections for Persons with Disabilities to Inclusive Society for Persons with Disabilities, which is the umbrella organization for persons with disabilities in Cameroon. So that's already an impact that we had on that. And just to mention that from there, we got Irish Aid Program Grant 1, that actually a channel through which we are delivering political participation in Cameroon, and we got the program Grant 2 later on. In 2013, we supported the electoral body, the Elections Cameroon. I have to say that they have done very well. I'm sure the Parliamentary Association will remember that some years back, they got an award on accessibility of the elections in Cameroon. That was thanks to the work that they did with us. And then currently we are in the program Grant 2, supported by Irish Aid, where now we've kind of done two things. One, we've narrowed it down to 4 councils where we actually demonstrate really with all components of political participation. And the other point is that we have actually extended from just elections, that is persons with disabilities being voters, and persons with disabilities now also being voted, you'll see more of that later, to actually also promoting citizenship participation by people with disability to the local development. So we've got some broad outcomes there, whereby from moving from a point in 2010 where people with disabilities, and not to say, I mean, that's very, I weigh my words, were nowhere to be seen, to a place where now today, women and men with disabilities in OPDs participate in political process. They are consulted, although there's still much to do, and not only in the project areas. That's another important point with this project. But this project did not only impact the project area, it actually had a national impact beyond the project area. Same with civil society organizations and the government structures that now recognize and promote social inclusion of women and men with disabilities. And the systems, also we see some systems change that actually now enable women and men with disabilities to contribute to the political participation process. So those are some of the outcomes that we can share at this point, although there's still a lot to do. Now, my colleague Sandra is going to talk about the achievements, that is give a number of statistics and figures to what we're able to do. Sandra?
Thank you, Sidi, for giving me the floor. Hi, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to share some achievements from the political participation project here in Cameroon. We have 3 main points to share these achievements at micro level, at meso level, and also at macro level, to see how we ensure that people with disabilities improve their skill, and also how we work to mainstream disability within places and programs here in Cameroon. First of all, when we are talking about achievement at micro level, we can see today, after all the implementation of this project, the increase in the number of persons with disabilities registered to vote. We can see the increase from 2011 to 2021 with among 35,000 of people with disabilities now registered to vote, according to Election Cameroon report. And we also work to build the capacity of persons with disability, and today they have more comfortable, more confident to engage in politics, and also their contribution are really valued. We also support persons with disability in the some official document, for example, the birth certificate and also the ID card. 4,500 is for ID card, because to be able to register on electoral list, you have to provide firstly birth certificate and also ID card. And in the project at the beginning, we observed that some people with disability don't have these documents. So the program focused firstly to provide support for them to have this document. We also increased the number of OPD's members registered with a political party in the project area, because today it is good to be interested in politics, and people with disabilities are now aware of their role to play within political parties and the importance to engage in public and political life. Politics is not, they are not out of concern when we are talking about politics. They have their voice should count in politics. We also increased in the number of persons with disability elected as member of executive board of political parties. People with disability are visible in political parties. They are not only here to vote for others, but they can also be elected. And this is, for example, in Cameroon, a great achievement as far as the ruling party itself encourage people with disability, review their internal text to ensure that people with disability also have the chance to be elected as executive board member. We also work to support the OPD umbrella, the Platform Inclusive Society for Persons with Disability, to be for the first time an electoral observer with persons with disability elected, accredited as observer for the first time. And we realized, we conducted two accessibility audits for the presidential election in 2018 and for the legislative and municipal election in 2020. We also value the contribution of persons with disability trained on leadership rights and responsibilities and advocacy to ensure that in all decision-making area, people with disabilities are represented, and where they are participated, their contribution, they have a meaningful participation, and their contribution are also valued.
Sandra, can I just ask you as a moderator, is this just for 4 municipal areas? On the previous slide, it said you worked in 4 municipal areas, and what proportion of the country is that?
Sorry?
You work, what proportion of the country are we talking about here? You said in the project area. How big is the project area compared to the whole of Cameroon, please? Okay,
we are implemented this project in 4 councils. Yeah. 2 in the center region, in Yaoundé 4 and Balmayo, and 2 in the far north region, Mara 1 and Mara 3 council. So we are demonstrating this approach in these four councils.
And how many councils are there across Cameroon altogether, just so our participants have some idea of this?
316 councils.
350.
Yes,
So this is really very much a pilot, yeah, of showing you how you can do it. Is that right?
Yeah. Can I just add something there? It's 360. So just to say that these councils were selected in a way that will be representative for the entire country. So because we have some socio-political blocks in the country. So that's one thing. And the other thing to say also is that although this is where we are kind of operating the pilot, but there's a lot of effect on the entire country. For example, when we work with Elections Cameroon at the national level, they cover the entire country and it applies to a lot of things. And we'll see that that will have had an impact in before capitalizing formally the results already. That will have had an impact in far beyond the four councils. Thank you. Sandra?
Yes, just conclude your remarks, please, Sandra.
Okay, thank you. So for the last point of these achievements at micro level, we also have some OPD member which have a consultative status in some council. For example, in Balmayo, it is true that there is no person with disabilities elected council member, but looking at the collaboration thanks to the express skills of person with disability, the mayor and the council decide to attribute a consultative status to the OPD, the local OPD, so they can provide some feedback, they can provide some improvement for the social Affairs Commission and the Education Commission. So whenever there is no local council, no person with disabilities in the local council, sometimes the collaboration can imply that the person with disability can also work with the council toward this consultative status. Now, some achievement at micro level to see how all this work can influence the civil societies and also relevant stakeholders to be sure that there is space provided for persons with disabilities to raise their voice. We can look at an improvement of an inclusive media coverage of electoral process with 161 journalists trained on right-based approach and disability inclusion. Because in this project, we realized that journalists are some relevant actor to help to raise awareness. And after the training, we observed that in 2018 and 2020, we have an improvement in terms of media coverage. We also looked at an increasing commitment of some human rights promotion organization, and one of these CSO, the record, developed a disability strategy, and today they are implemented Cameroon open participatory budget, and thus this project is really disability friendly at the beginning, and it is good to see how we support them at the beginning in 2018 and see how they are progressed in 2021 by implementing a disability friendly project and how they work to influence their specific network to mainstream disability. We also observe an improvement of the collaboration between OPD's member and political leaders. And today, some political parties have signed the inclusion charter of disability, the inclusion charter the Disability Inclusion Charter, some political parties have signed. This is a specific initiative of the OPD's umbrella to ensure that political parties engage to really mainstream disability within their intervention and within their party. We also look at an increase in the number of local council member trend on the right of people with disability to political parties. That is why my CD just talked about the invitation, the formal invitation of persons with disabilities to council session. We also have a better communication, a better understanding of what are the needs of persons with disability as far as local development is concerned. The local council member also have a better understanding on what
Sandra, I think you need to draw your remarks to a close. So if you have one more slide, I think you need to show us that. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Maybe. Okay. So we finally look at a better involvement of the community member in fight against stigma, because now we have the community engage themselves as far as identification of persons with disability in terms of networking with them. Finally, as far as the micro achievement at micro level is concerned, we provide support to the Ministry of Social Affairs, the specific ministry in charge of the person with disability. We support them in the review of the national legislation related to disability. We have a disability law in 2010 disability law.
Yes, 2010.
Yes, 2010 disability law. And we support the Ministry of Social Affairs to review the legislation and to have the enablement act of this disability law in 2018 after the Global Disability Summit in London. We also support the ratification process for the UNCRPD and the ADP here in Cameroon. We just recently ratified them in December. We also have the renewal. We work for the renewal of the mandate of the alternate senator, Mr. Robert Onono. He is a wheelchair user, and he is the only one we have in the parliament. There is no senator, there is no parliamentarian. We just have this alternate senator nominated by the president of the republic, and his mandate have been renewed. We also contribute to set up a parliamentarian network on persons with disabilities participation in public and political life. This network supports the advocacy effort of OPDs in terms of mainstreaming disability in legal framework. This was an initiative of a member associate of the platform Goodwill Cameroon and OPD, and we support this network of parliamentarians to see how we can progress and we can follow up how the work has been done with political parties. We also, Sightsavers today is like the strategic partner in country when we are talking about disability issues. We are very certain. We develop for the organization a strategic position, a leadership position when we are talking about disability issues. We are always consulted. We are always invited, even by some INGO, to talk more, to discuss about disability and how we can improve the intervention and ensure that persons with disability are now included in all the specific domain, in all the program, in all the.
Thank you. And we can see that you've managed to get 12 disabled people, persons with disabilities as municipal councils, but we hear councillors, and that's on presumably the 360 councils. So a long way to go, but some very important points that you've made there. So I think we're going to need to go on to our next speaker, and maybe the learning points that you've brought out, Sandra and Joseph, we can come back to in the question and answer session, but we need to give time for a last speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
So thank you both very much. Now, our last speaker is Sheikh Sek, who is the Programme Manager of Inclusive Education and Social Inclusion, Sightsavers, Senegal, which I think is not a Commonwealth country, but in the West Africa Francophile area. And we're very happy to have your perspective on this as well. So over to you, Sheikh.
Thank you, and greetings from Dakar City, Senegal, to all the panelists. Lovely to be here to share the experience of Senegal in political participation project funded by Irish Aid. Okay, I know that we have the same problem and difficulty with Cameroon country office, but just to share the aim of the project is to increase the political participation of women and men with disability, and by promoting representation for an active involvement in the local development dynamics and the election. And this is the aim of the project during the 5 years of implementation. Just to say that the project is implemented in 2017, and now we are in the end of the project. We have 3 outcomes to aim. The first is to reinforce capacity building of women and men with disability for their active participation in public and life and development initiative. And the second is at the meso level, where we want to civil society and decision makers in the project area recognize and promote the political participation of women and men with disability. And the third outcome is at macro level, where we want to give national and local governance system enable women and men with disability to contribute to the political process, public policies, and local development. That's the 3 outcomes that we want to achieve at the end of the project. Now I want to share the locality of integration. We are in 5 councils in 4 towns in Senegal: Dakar, capital city, Kaolack, Kaffrine, and Louga. Just to say that Senegal have 14 towns or region, and in the 14 towns, we are just in 4 towns. We implement the project with partners, the Senegalese Federation of Association of Persons with Disability, who is an umbrella, a national umbrella of organization. We have also the Ministry of Health across the General Directorate of Social Action, and other partners include civil society organization, local collectivities, and women association particularly. After 5 years of intervention, we note some successes and learnings across range of perception and behavior among people with disability, decision maker, and communities. Now we we're saying we have OPDs have better understanding of voting process and the importance of for decision maker to include person with disability in their organization. Just some example, we have a lot of capacity building for OPD's member, and we have also the leadership and woman commitment, and the perception of capacity of people with disability are very improved in Senegal. And we know that repositioning of women, particularly women with disability, in all the process and political participation in Senegal. Some other success is the reinforcement of alliances with civil society. For example, at the last local election and presidential election, the national umbrella of association of person with disability accrued observer status at the election, and we make sure that civil society leaders and political participation are trained in social inclusion. We also improve capacity of OPD's federation leadership to advocate for their needs with government officials, and the coalition building, networking, and alliance with women leadership organization for joint advocacy. Now, for example, now we have at national level women committee of persons with disability who are very active in social and political affairs in Senegal. Another success and learning is effective inclusion in national and local debates and local development plan, where we know that we have the local budget. Now the local budget and plan for local collectivity are include person with disability. We have trained the local collectivity member for when and how to include the need of PWDs in their local budget and plan. We do a lot of advocacy for accessible voting and advocacy document. We know that people with disability is now participate in local government meeting and work group and use of sign language in 2017 election campaign. That's some of key success in to show that how we inclusion in national and local debates and local development plan. Another case success is the for our we have now more than 10 people with disability elected in the last local election. The last local election is during January 2022. We have 10 people with disability elected as a mayor or a member of local council. The commitment signed by member of political participation alliance and movement to and mayor to include people with disability in their electoral list. This is a great achievement for our, and some training we are doing with people with disability to participate in local session and to register it with political party. That's how we how to show the effective participation in local election in Senegal. Here is the last case successes and learning about revision on of electoral code. We know that, for example, the electoral code is approved in Senegal, and the decentralization law amended to promote the inclusion of PWDs. We have 3 articles approved and amended in the Electoral Code. And for example, when people with disability has disabilities that make it difficult to reach polling station, he can choose any of the polling station in the polling place to cast a vote. He has priority access to voting in the police station, and the procedure provide for the Article A to is applicable to him. Another example, the elector who, because of his handicap, is unable to choose a ballot paper to introduce it into the envelope of or to slip into the ballot box. On his request, authorized to be assisted by a person who is chosen or by a member of the polling station to accompany him. That's some case success Senegalese country office would like to share with the panelists. And we know that people with disability can improve access to voting facility and greater representation of persons with disability on voter registries in political party and local council. Here is why it is the importance on political participation for people with disability. For ours, the importance of people with disability having in policy making is critical in 2022, because people with disability are active members of the community and their family, and that they need to represent themselves in the political process. The other point is the political participation project has been able to register many individuals to vote in Senegal. Training on gender inclusion with OPDs and ministry personnel allowed to start thinking about what they are doing and who is really missing from the conversation and benefit. And the project has allowed women the possibility of seeing themselves as equal to men and having the opportunity to speak up. And the last is some challenge I would like to share with you. We are now the project to make national census of disability people organization in Senegal. We are in 4 towns or 4 regions, and we would like to scaling up the intervention at national level to benefit all people with disability. And for that, we need to make or have national data of people with disability organization and number, type, kind of disability in all the territory of Senegal. And what did Sightsavers to measure accessibility in program? It is to disaggregate data by disability to ensure inclusion, integrates learning into project to ensure our program are accessible to people with disability, and reinforce advocacy methods around the need to collect disability data in all projects.
Thank you very much. So that's the input from our four speakers. I just wanted to broaden the experience out a little bit because people are obviously at different stages of development in this process. In Southern Africa, they've been doing it a lot longer, and SAFOD, which came out of a battle in an institution in Zimbabwe, where Joseph Malinga and Alexander Piri were inmates, and they fought hard for their rights. And out of that came the organization in Zimbabwe, which then spread for disabled person-led organizations across Southern Africa. And one of their key things was to get members in parliament. And they had a good track record of doing that, particularly the majority party in South Africa. There were 15 members of parliament at the height. It's now down to 6, which perhaps shows how the priority has changed. In Malawi, there have been a large number of members of parliament elected, and municipalities. And the process, I think, is very important and different to what we've heard from the West African French experience, where the process is led by disabled people rather than being led by NGOs, who we see as allies. But I think it is a qualitative difference where it is led out of our own experience. And certainly from the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum, we would urge that those NGOs that are working in the field need to make greater effort to pass on the baton of leadership to the disabled people's organizations, because it is they that need to change things. One thing that puzzled me, which I will put out to particularly the speakers from both Cameroon and Senegal, this issue of registering for election seems to be a huge barrier. If you talk about the large number of disabled people, and I'll quote Article 29, which all these governments have signed up to ensure that persons with disabilities can effectively and fully participate in public and political life on an equal basis with others, directly or through freely chosen representatives. And that particularly is for people with intellectual impairments to have supporters, including the right and opportunity to vote and to be elected. If you have to have all of this registration, it seems to me that that's a barrier to actual mass franchise for disabled people. Now, maybe it's a barrier to a lot of other people in those countries, but they cannot claim to be democracies if there are large numbers of people who are not eligible to vote. The point is, everybody, when they reach the age of majority, whatever that is, whether it's 16, 18, 21, should have the vote, particularly all women and all men, whether they're disabled or not. So this seems to be quite a big barrier that these countries are putting up to people actually exercising the process. And the fact that you have both told us that you had to work hard to get ID and birth registration, surely we need a process where the new census, when it identifies people as disabled, that information is kept in a way that can actually engender people's voting possibilities. I wonder what you two have to say about that from both Cameroon and Senegal, that seems to be a really big barrier, it seems to me.
Yeah, can I go first?
Yes, sure.
Yes, thank you very much, Richard, for that. And in fact, as you have said, it is a barrier to everybody. It's a matter of systems. You have two different kind of political systems, so to say. There are systems where once you get to the voting age, which is 20 years in Cameroon, then once you have your ID card, you can go and vote. But there are other systems where you need to register first, because for some of the governments, it's a big stake about participation. That is, if you just take the census and you see the few people who can vote, you have like 1% participation at the end of the day. But if people come to register first, then the chances are that for people who have come to register, there will be a higher participation rate. So it is the system, that's how the system is. You must register first, everybody, not only the people with disabilities. But then being a barrier, as we always say, is even more of a barrier to people with disabilities. Because as Sandra said, one of the actions that we are doing is to enable, to support them to have papers to be able to register. To register, you need an ID card, and to have an ID card, you need a birth certificate. And in a lot of cases, children with disability, people with disability don't have birth certificate, we don't have ID cards. So that's where we need to support them to register. There are other barriers around communication, about even accessibility of the registering point in terms of communication, in terms of even physical accessibility to go and register. That's what I can say.
Okay, thank you. And either of our speakers from Cameroon want to come in on that issue?
Sandra?
No. Okay, I'll pass on to Danita for a more general comment on access to the electoral process.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity again to just say that, again, access to the electoral process is not easy. And I think for example, we have been doing in this country, that is Kenya, is actually what Joseph has said. I mean, we have a responsibility to help persons with disabilities get their IDs, their identification cards and their voters cards to be able to participate, because those are majorly the essential things. But again, I want to just say, Richard, that in terms of persons with disabilities to also even participate in politics, I mean, the nomination fees of political parties is way too high. I mean, you know, persons with disabilities don't also have money, but you realize that in most countries, again, their nomination fees that they pay to political parties to be able to be nominated, you know, to be able to move a little step ahead is extremely high. So if these nomination fees can be reduced for persons with disabilities to do politics, I think they can move a little bit closer to offer themselves, because persons with disabilities actually do not only go to polling centers to vote, they go to polling centers also to be voted for. So, you know, and that has been the problem that we have been having. We have tried across where I have interacted with the CPA, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. You realize that the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association has this network of members of parliament in the 9 regions across the globe where CPA works. So we have the Africa, you know, the Africa region, the Asia region, the Australia region, the Caribbean region, like that. So that's members of, and we are champions. I am in charge of Africa, for example. I started off as the champion in charge of Africa, parliamentarians with disabilities in the Africa region. Then I became the chairperson of the Global Parliamentarians with Disabilities Network. So that way, we are able to collect views from members of Parliament with disabilities in terms of what have they gone through as members of Parliament to get into Parliament. And I've seen a question here being asked: how can local councils, you know, those kind of local councils promote the you know, persons with disabilities to get into Parliament? And in Uganda, for example, which is my neighboring country, they have in their you know, constitution, they have what they are calling you know, the electoral college system. Now, electoral college system guarantees persons with disabilities to be voted for at a specific region to represent persons with disabilities at that level to get into Parliament. But you realize that many countries do not have those kind of electoral college systems where persons with disabilities are voted for by their own persons with disabilities caucuses at the local levels to be able to become members of Parliament. So that is something that we are trying to see how we can borrow from Uganda to be able to ensure that it can move to other regions, so that persons with disabilities are able to vote in their own persons with disabilities as members of Parliament. So that is what an electoral college, for example, does, and that is what we have actually been doing. So I'm glad that you are talking about issues. And by the way, Richard, you also realize that electoral violence, I mean, violence when it comes to politics affects persons with disabilities a very big way. Persons with disabilities do not get into polling stations because, you know, electoral violence, you know, what time will you run away? You see situations where a disabled person is even removed his crutches or his wheelchair. You know, he can be, you know, and so he loses a wheelchair, he loses his crutches, he cannot do politics. So you know, that kind of electoral violence must also be addressed across the globe so that persons with disabilities participate in politics. So for me, those are my few points that I'm thinking that we need to really address.
So we'll come. I'll give you a chance again in a minute, but there are 3 or 4 people asking questions. I'm going to ask them to come in. First, Catherine Perry's got 2 in the box here. Perhaps can we bring her in on her microphone to ask these two questions and put them in a context. And then we've got Rockefeller Okayo and Mussolini Eugene from Rwanda, I think. So could we take Catherine first?
Yeah, hi.
Hannah,
No.
tell us who you are first, Catherine, and where you work.
Yeah, so I'm the lead for advocacy and engagement at the Global Disability Innovation Hub.
Okay.
We're an academic research centre and community interest company based out of UCL, but we do run 80-20-30, which is a massive UKA programme related to assistive technology. And so I guess listening to you all speak, there are a few things that came to mind. One is, you know, a lot of these programmes sound great, but it sounds to me like there's a real issue around stigma, not just in enabling disabled people to, you know, reach the ballot box and stand at the podium, but also within their families and sort of realizing within communities that disabled people hold value in politics. So how do we tackle that? And secondly, you know, assistive technology has been mentioned, but it's a really, really crucial factor. So how do we, within this debate of sort of enabling political participation, how do we amplify the need of disabled people in regards to assistive technology? Because so often without that, you know, we're just closing the door already and keeping disabled people segregated. So I guess there's a lot of how questions from me. Thanks.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Catherine. I'm going to take the three questions and then go around the panel on those. So if you can note them down, panel. There were two there from Catherine: stigma and access to assistive technology. So Rockefeller, can we bring you in, please, to ask your question? Is he still on the call?
He's on the call and unmuted, but I'm not sure if he's in the question.
Well, I'll read it out then. We have many potential aspirants currently contesting for various political seats in Kenya that lack resources to realise their dreams. I think you've already talked towards this. Are there partners that can assist in this in any small way, campaign materials to propel us to leadership positions? Because we need to be on the table and not in the I'm not sure Manu, for us to change awareness into reality. So that's about financial assistance for individuals who want to run for office. And Mr. Mussolini, can we bring you on to ask your question? No? Can we unmute Mussolini Eugene?
Hello.
Hello, yes, welcome. Could you ask your question, please?
Good morning. Thank you very much, Star, for giving me this opportunity. Apparently, I'm thankful to all presenters that have shown up the interest and the need for the voice of people with disabilities we represent. My view is how can we harmonize our platform for this global opportunity and increase our voice in the particular states we belong and they come on board in this decision making on the global level. Two, in particular states that we in, there are disabilities that one can automatically eliminate or just ignore when it comes to ballots and votes. When we are going to the campaigns and the voting, that's what categories of people with disabilities, including the visual impairment. You wonder how these people are considered to have their right of choice to vote when they don't see. But if I can share my experience at home, we reached a level of coming to all categories of people with disabilities that at least can vote on his right choice. That's when National Election Commission preparing the ballot paper, they consider the blind one so that they can choose. Moderator, if I had a chance to share home experience, politics home is inclusive and they cater for the grassroots level up to the national level. In decision-making platforms, they consider to put each individual that represent a woman, a youth, a person with disability. For Rwanda is okay so far, but when it comes to this global agenda and seats, we need to come together and work closely. I'm thankful for my sister from Kenya raised the concern. Here we are, and we are able to fight for the same in case this platform engaged in. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much for that. And now, so we've got a number of issues there that have been thrown up that I'm going to, anyone who wants to come in on any of those. So I'll just summarize. There was the issue of stigma raised by Catherine Perry, which actually I think counts, particularly in Africa, for far more than those of us who were drafting the convention thought. There's very little in there about challenging stigma, just says move away from traditional views. But actually what we find, and there was a piece of work from university colleagues a couple of years ago that showed the high level of stigma. And when we did a training last year, online training with more than 421 participants from 41 countries, they wrote volumes in the coursework about each tribe's different views of each impairment and so on. And these are very live issues still in much of Africa and indeed much of Asia. So I think we don't take enough view about that. And someone talked, I think it was Mr. Cheik, about invisibility, and I think Joseph Oye also talked about that. This invisibility is almost like we're not human, and therefore we don't have the human right to be part of the electoral process. Now, my question to add to that is, how do we enforce the laws that should have come out of the adoption of the implementation of the convention? There will be laws and they need to be enforced. So there was a code that we talked about in Senegal. How is that enforced when people are not, for instance, taking account of it? We had the issue raised of people with visual impairment. I think there's plenty of examples from around the world how you can do that. There was a monitoring in Zambia over the last 10 years, which has very clearly made sure that all polling stations are accessible to visually impaired people and physically impaired, and that was something that we can base, but we need to spread this experience. Beyond stigma, applying technology, which perhaps we need to look about, and there was issue of financing disabled people, or perhaps not financing them. Perhaps the party should be paying for the fee for the person rather than the person paying the fee. In a democracy, perhaps the party pays for the people that it's selected rather than the people paying, because that has a smack of corruption about it, that you pay for a place. And we have had in the past, in the history of mother of democracy, British Parliament, only 150 years ago, MPs were buying their seats, the rotten boroughs as they were called. So we have that history in democracy. We need to learn from that and say, no, it's not about buying a place. It's about being selected on merit or being selected as a representative. And then maybe the party should pay the fee rather than the person paying the fee. And then a last one, how do we increase our voice across all of this? So whichever one of those or all of them you want to take on, I'll start in reverse order. So we'll come to Joseph and Sandra first, and then Sheikh, and then we'll end up with you, Denita. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sandra, are you there? Do you want to take some of the questions?
Oh, yes, maybe the last question of Catherine related to the ID card. Let's read the question. But how do we tackle ID card attainment at the source of the issue? Aiding disabled people get an ID card is great, but surely this problem can only be solved sustainably by making the political classes accountable. I just want to add that in this approach, we use the twin track approach. It is important that we are providing the service to people with disabilities by supporting them with ID cards, and also explaining to them the usefulness for their citizenship. But we are also working to strengthen the capacities of some government actors involved in the process, such as the National Civil Status Office, to take disability into account in their daily activities. So when the program will end, we ensure that some structure, government structure, will take over. We always sensitize the community in terms of the inclusiveness of process, and have specific activities directed to OPDs, so that after the program, we will be sure that people with disabilities are aware of the importance to have ID card because of citizenship, because of the importance of their contribution in local development. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me,
Joseph, come in on a couple of those.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. First of all, on stigma, I think this is a real issue in, as Richard Rade said, in Africa. So, but what we do is that we do sensitization in many ways. And one of the way in which we kind of try to address stigma is by using role models in the disability among disabled people, to show people that it is possible. The other thing that we do, because the stigma really is not only with the common people, and I've had some terrible experiences talking to the decision makers, where they said some things that I cannot even repeat about people with disabilities. But then what we do there is that we actually...
No, we've lost you.
Joseph has just dropped out, Richard.
Okay, well, we'll give him a chance to come back, but I'll go on to Sheikh. Is he still online?
Yes.
Yeah. Sheikh, do you want to pick any of those questions to come back on? Yeah.
Yes. So sorry, I got downside. So we talked about stigma, or saying that we use role models.
Yeah.
One, then we also, for politicians, decision makers, we actually use the legislation of the country, the provisions of the constitution that protect and promote people's disabilities, the provisions of the Disability Act of 2010. Recently, Cameroon ratified the UNCRPD. So we use that, and also the head of state of Cameroon for his current term in office during his swearing-in inaugural speech clearly referred to people with disabilities. So that's what we also use. And finally, the OPDs, the Organization of People with Disabilities, also do a lot of sensitization work against the stigma. It is a journey, it is a progress. This is to change social attitude, so it takes time. But overall, we see that things are beginning to move a little bit. Now, about assistive technology, that is a very, very important point. We talked about access to polling stations by people with disabilities. The electoral body Elections Cameroon, what they do is that with our support, I mean, working with us, they do some braille tags on ballot papers. That is, the people visually impaired can see. But recently they came back to us to say that they've printed so many braille ballots, but they do realize that not everybody with visual impairment can actually use those. So and that's where we actually said, okay, let us now find an assistive technology solution. One could be just like that, maybe hearing loops. So if we have this kind of technology in the polling station, that can help. So assistive technology really is something very important for access to elections. Now, financial, Richard, it's not corruption per se, because the way it happens is that initially you need to be selected in a list, and that is the most difficult thing to do. That is because, you know, the political arena, it's fearless. I mean, it's all kind of things that are happening there. Nobody wants to cede their position for a person with disabilities. I was asked once that, do you think that we're going to remove somebody from a list just because they want to put a person with disability? So when now you succeed in having a person with disabilities on merit, or as you said, representing a group in the list, that's where all the members in the list are now required to pay a financial contribution. In Cameroon, it's quite high. In the ruling party, it is 500,000. That is about 800 US dollar, something like that. So it's quite huge. And what we have done with the candidates that we are supporting in this pilot is that Sightsavers actually paid that for them. And that is really a big problem, because at this point, we want to avoid any excuse that will cause the parties to say, okay, we put them in the list, they cannot pay, so out of the list, things like that. And that is really a big point that we. Yeah.
I think that should be challenged in the High Court in the country. I think it's unlawful under the conventions that have been signed, and it really should be challenged. And if you fail there, you should go to Geneva, to the International Human Rights Court, because this is really not acceptable, this sort of practice.
Because what they will argue with you is that every other member on the list pays the 500,000 out of their pocket. So I agree with you that from the position of the UNCRPD, etc.,
positive action is required, and that you can treat disabled people more favorably than other people under the convention. And that's what we have to use. It's part of our human rights. You know?
And that's something we're advocating for, because right now the electoral code of law of Cameroon does not have any positive action dispositions at all, provisions at all. So there is this big concept of sociological components, that they say all sociological components should be represented in a list. But sociological component could mean indigenous people, could mean women, could mean the youth, could mean there is no specification. So we're actually advocating strongly. We've been doing that for many years now with the OPDs, so that there is a clear provision for people with disabilities in the electoral law in a way of positive action, positive discrimination.
Thank you, Joseph. I'll move on to, if I may, because we're running out of time, to Sheikh.
Yeah.
Just any observations on those questions, short, brief, and then I'm going to, because we're coming up to 10:30, I'll go to Danita for the last word.
Thank you all very much. I will be just to say that in Senegal has a social orientation law since 2010 on the protection and promotion of people with disability, which not only responds to a social demand. In addition, with the participation of the OPD's Federation in the national dialogue, in particular at the political commission, the electoral code were revised following the advocacy document produced for accessible voting by people with disability and accepted by stakeholders involved under the lead of the General Directorate of Election. For example, people with the voting assistant is amended in Senegal in the electoral code. For example, people with visual impairment are authorized to be assisted by a person in his choice to support him at the voting process. Just to say again, in 2021, strong advocacy work was done with the General Directorate of Election and the various stakeholders to facilitate the vote of people with disability, and in addition of the revision of electoral codes which allows the people with disability to vote outside the original offices and to vote in priority without queuing, and poster in design and the large character were displayed in the polling station to allow the deaf, mute, and the visual impaired people to have information about the vote. Mechanism is in place to measure and track how people with disability are empowered. This includes capacity assessment tools using new technology for all project target beneficiary, and need assessment tools for potential candidates to election. For people with disability candidates, the questionnaire shows that they need reinforcement on mentoring and training on the electoral process. The national umbrella of Federation of People with Disability set up a mechanism for monitoring people with disability candidate for local election. We've informed about the financial and logistical support needed by people with disability candidates, for example, in Luga and Dakar areas. Thank you. Just
thank you.
Some words I can share with you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the work you've been doing, and indeed for our colleagues also in Cameroon who are doing this work. And it shows how far we've got to go. Danita, last word from the contributors, and then I'll wind it up. So brief. You're not, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, once again. And for me, I've listened really. I mean, we still have a long way to go, yes. And we still, as a parliament or as countries, we still need to treat persons with disabilities as rights holders. I mean, persons with disabilities have rights, and these rights cut across, not as sympathy, sympathy seekers. Persons with disabilities, and that's how you can hear also in terms of Cameroon. I mean, politics is expensive. I've listened to Joseph, and the way he's speaking, politics is expensive. It's all about money, and that is why you see even within countries or political parties, those with money, huge amounts of money, are the ones who literally buy their party lists or party spaces. And so for me as a person, as a member of parliament for persons with disabilities in Kenya, what we continue to do actually is to continue to look at our laws. And we continue. In fact, we just came out of a new constitution almost some time back. We changed our constitution. We have been trying to revise the constitution to actually, I mean, constitutions are not static. They keep changing according to the, the emerging issues, and persons with disabilities have their issues that have to be captured. In Kenya, we have a whole chapter 4 of the Kenya Constitution talks entirely about marginalized people, marginalized groups, and persons with disabilities. So for me, in my own line of duty, I have come to realize that persons with disabilities' rights are better when they are protected by law, by the Constitution. That way, it is easier. It becomes a little easier to work with that when our rights as persons with disabilities of this world are protected by our constitutions. So, so for me, that is what I can just quickly say. Political parties hardly see persons with disabilities as valuable. They don't see them as valuable people in their political parties. Even when you find a strong person with disability.
Yeah. You're freezing, I think. I think we're losing the connection there, Danita. No. We are not hearing you. It's breaking up. Anyway, I'm afraid I'm going to have to end it there because we've run on for 90 minutes, and I think we've covered a lot of issues. So we can't hear you, Danita. We cannot hear you. Sorry, technology defeats us again, but I think our message from this meeting is very clear, and I want to make this undertaking from the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum, who link up all the umbrella organisations. We are going to have our conference in April, and we will make this a priority in our action plan for the next 2 to 4 years. And I think it's very important that less than half of the Commonwealth countries have actually got proper legislation that is compliant with the convention and their constitution. So we need to do that. So I'm going to thank all of our speakers for that. Joseph Oy, Sandra Rimo, Sheikh Sek, and of course, Danita, thanking you all. And for Clive, who's organised this, and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, and for Sightsavers for sharing 2 of their examples. And we need to go forward collaborating and supporting our DPOs, OPDs to actually step up and fill up the space that has been created by international treaties. So this becomes a reality on the ground. It's no small order to achieve that, but I think we've scratched the surface of what needs to be done. So thank you very much, all of you, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.